The hardest moment in life is not losing someone you love. It is discovering they suffered in silence while you believed they had already moved on. Ryan Brooks adjusted the cuff of his tailored navy suit as the revolving doors of the Grand Regent Hotel turned slowly beneath the bright autumn sunlight. Every visit to the historic five-star hotel carried the same predictable rhythm. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Uniformed valets greeted wealthy guests by name. Crystal chandeliers sparkled through towering glass windows while the scent of polished cedar and fresh flowers drifted into the elegant lobby. Ryan had come to finalize a multi-million-dollar partnership with an international hospitality group. His assistants had spent weeks preparing contracts, presentations, and financial projections. By every measurable standard, life had rewarded him generously. His technology empire had expanded into several states. Business magazines called him one of the youngest self-made billionaires in America. Investors admired his discipline. Competitors respected his instincts. Yet success had a strange habit of making old memories feel farther away than they really were. 3 years had passed since his divorce from Emily Carter. Friends occasionally mentioned that she had quietly disappeared from their social circle, but Ryan never asked where she went. He convinced himself she had started a different life somewhere beyond Chicago. That belief made moving forward easier. At least that was what he told himself. The hotel manager welcomed Ryan with a warm handshake before leading him toward a private conference suite on the second floor. They crossed the expansive marble lobby where guests checked in beneath enormous floral arrangements, and soft piano music floated gently through the air. Everything reflected comfort, wealth, and quiet sophistication. Ryan barely noticed the surroundings until something unusual caught his attention near the far end of the hallway. A housekeeping cart stood beside an open guest room. Fresh white towels rested neatly on its shelves. Cleaning supplies reflected softly beneath the warm hallway lights. Beside the cart, a woman knelt carefully, while wiping the polished hardwood floor with slow, deliberate movements. She wore a simple beige housekeeping uniform, comfortable black shoes, and her long chestnut hair was tied neatly behind her head. One hand occasionally rested against the unmistakable curve of her pregnancy before she returned to work with patient concentration. Ryan slowed without realizing it. Something about the gentle movement of her hands felt painfully familiar. The hotel manager continued speaking about investment opportunities, but every word faded into distant background noise. Ryan's eyes remained fixed on the woman. She slowly stood, lifted the cleaning bucket, and turned toward the hallway. The moment their eyes met, time seemed to stop. Emily. Ryan felt every breath leave his lungs. The hallway, the elegant decor, the conversations around him, even the soft piano downstairs disappeared beneath a single impossible realization. His former wife stood only a few yards away wearing a housekeeping uniform inside one of the most luxurious hotels in the city. Emily recognized him immediately. Surprise flickered briefly across her face before settling into remarkable composure. She did not look embarrassed. She did not attempt to hide. Instead, she offered the same gentle smile she once gave neighbors, cashiers, and complete strangers who crossed her path. "Hello, Ryan," she said quietly. Her voice carried the same warmth he remembered, untouched by bitterness despite the years between them. Ryan struggled to answer. "Emily, what are you doing here?" She glanced naturally toward the housekeeping cart before smiling faintly. "Working." The simple answer struck him harder than any complicated explanation could have. Ryan looked from the cart to her uniform and then toward the gentle curve of her pregnancy. Questions rushed through his mind faster than he could organize them. Why was she here? How long had she been working at the hotel? Where had everyone gone who once surrounded her? And most of all, who was the father of the child she carried so carefully? Before he could ask another question, the sound of an elevator echoed through the corridor. Several hotel guests stepped out, carrying luggage while another housekeeper waved politely toward Emily. "Room 1214 is ready whenever you finish here," the coworker called. Emily nodded with an easy smile. "Thank you. I will be there in just a minute." Ryan watched in disbelief as another employee approached carrying fresh linens. "Emily," the young man said gratefully, Thank you for helping me yesterday. My grandmother is doing much better. Emily smiled sincerely. I am so glad to hear that. Give her my best wishes. The young employee walked away with visible appreciation. Ryan noticed something unexpected. Nobody spoke to Emily with pity. Nobody treated her as invisible. Every employee greeted her with genuine affection and quiet respect. She thanked everyone by name. She listened carefully whenever someone spoke. Even while dressed in the simplest uniform inside the building, she somehow carried herself with a quiet dignity that no expensive suit could imitate. The hotel manager finally realized Ryan had stopped walking. Is everything all right, Mr. Brooks? Ryan could barely answer. I know her. The manager glanced toward Emily with a warm smile. Miss Carter? She is one of the finest people we have ever hired. Every guest asks for her by name. Ryan turned back toward Emily, who had already picked up the cleaning bucket and carefully pushed the housekeeping cart farther down the hallway. She never looked back. She simply continued her work with steady, graceful determination, as though carrying burdens no one else could see had become part of her daily routine. Standing in the middle of one of the most luxurious hotels in America, surrounded by unimaginable wealth and polished perfection, Ryan Brooks felt something inside him quietly begin to break, because for the first time since signing the divorce papers, he realized he knew absolutely nothing about the life the woman he once loved had been living after she walked away. Ryan somehow finished the business meeting, although he could not remember a single number discussed inside the conference room. Executives spoke confidently about investment strategies, projected occupancy rates, and long-term expansion plans. But every presentation dissolved into meaningless background noise. Every few seconds his thoughts returned to the quiet hallway where Emily had stood wearing a housekeeping uniform, gently pushing a cleaning cart while carrying a child beneath her heart. When the meeting finally ended nearly 90 minutes later, Ryan declined the invitation to lunch with the hotel investors. I have something I need to take care of, he explained before walking alone through the elegant corridors of the Grand Regent Hotel. The afternoon sun streamed through enormous windows, painting warm reflections across polished marble floors. Hotel guests moved comfortably between restaurants, boutiques, and conference halls without noticing the emotional storm unfolding inside one visitor. Ryan found himself searching each hallway almost instinctively, hoping to see Emily again. He finally spotted her near the executive suites on the 12th floor. She carefully replaced fresh towels inside a housekeeping cart before knocking softly on a guest room door. An elderly couple welcomed her with bright smiles. Emily, the woman said warmly, thank you again for bringing extra blankets last night. My husband finally slept comfortably. Emily smiled with genuine kindness. I am so happy to hear that. Please let me know if you need anything else before checkout. The couple thanked her again before closing the door. Ryan remained several yards away, watching quietly. Nothing about Emily's behavior suggested someone defeated by life. She moved patiently from room to room with quiet professionalism, greeting every guest with respect regardless of who they were. A little boy suddenly ran down the hallway chasing a toy airplane while his exhausted mother hurried behind him apologizing to everyone nearby. Before the child could trip over a suitcase left outside another room, Emily gently knelt and caught the little airplane before handing it back with a cheerful smile. Captain, she said playfully, I think your airplane almost took a wrong turn. The little boy laughed happily before running back toward his mother. Thank you, the grateful woman said. Emily simply nodded. Have a wonderful vacation. Ryan remembered that smile. During their marriage, Emily had always spoken to strangers as though they mattered. Grocery store cashiers, delivery drivers, elderly neighbors, children in parks. She carried the same kindness into every ordinary moment. He used to admire that quality before success slowly convinced him that efficiency mattered more than small acts of compassion. Watching her now, he realized nothing about her heart had changed. She noticed him standing nearby only after placing another stack of fresh towels onto her cart. You are still here, she said softly. Ryan stepped closer. Can we talk for a minute? Emily looked toward the schedule clipped to the side of her cart before answering politely. I have a few minutes before my next room. They walked toward a quiet seating area overlooking the hotel's indoor garden. The sound of flowing water from a decorative fountain filled the peaceful space while sunlight filtered through tall glass ceilings. Ryan looked at her carefully. Emily. I never imagined. He stopped because no sentence sounded appropriate. Emily saved him from finishing it. You never imagined seeing me here. Ryan nodded honestly. No. She smiled gently. Life rarely follows the plans we make for it. Ryan glanced toward her uniform. Are you doing all right? Emily seemed to understand the deeper question hidden beneath his words. Yes, she answered simply. I am. Ryan frowned slightly. You do not have to pretend with me. Emily looked directly into his eyes. I am not pretending. Before Ryan could continue, another hotel employee approached carrying a box of guest supplies. Emily, the young woman said nervously. I accidentally switched 2 VIP room deliveries. I am afraid I created a problem. Emily immediately stood. Do not worry. We will fix it together. The employee looked visibly relieved. Thank you. I knew you would know what to do. Ryan watched as Emily calmly reorganized the supplies, explained the corrections step by step, and encouraged the younger employee without criticizing her mistake. Within minutes the problem disappeared. Everyone makes mistakes, Emily said warmly. The important part is helping each other solve them. The young employee smiled gratefully before returning to work. Ryan noticed something unusual once again. Nobody seemed intimidated by Emily despite her position. Instead, people naturally trusted her. They sought her advice, thanked her sincerely, and smiled whenever she appeared. Even the hotel manager passing through the hallway paused briefly. Emily, thank you for staying late yesterday, she said. Several guests wrote wonderful comments about your kindness. Emily looked almost embarrassed by the praise. I was happy to help. After the manager left, Ryan quietly asked, How long have you worked here? Almost 2 years. Emily replied. 2 years? Ryan repeated, surprised. Yes. And you have been happy? Emily looked around the elegant hallway before answering. Happiness is not always about where you work, Ryan. Sometimes it is about knowing your work matters to someone. Those words lingered between them long after she spoke them. Before Ryan could ask another question, a small radio clip to Emily's uniform sounded softly. Miss Carter, housekeeping assistance requested in the presidential suite. Emily reached for the radio. I will be there in just a moment. She looked back at Ryan with the same calm expression she had carried all afternoon. I should get back. Ryan nodded slowly. Emily. She paused. I am glad to see you are healthy, he said quietly. Thank you, she replied with a gentle smile. Then she placed one hand naturally against the curve of her pregnancy, turned the housekeeping cart toward the executive elevator, and disappeared down the bright hallway once again, leaving Ryan standing alone with the growing realization that the greatest mystery was no longer why Emily worked as a hotel cleaner, but how someone carrying so much quiet grace could still look stronger than the billionaire who had spent years believing success belonged only to people like him. Ryan left the Grand Regent Hotel just before sunset, but the image of Emily quietly pushing a housekeeping cart refused to leave his mind. The Chicago skyline glowed beneath the fading light as traffic flowed steadily across the bridges, yet everything outside his car window seemed strangely distant. 3 years earlier he had convinced himself their divorce was simply another difficult chapter that ambitious people sometimes faced while chasing success. He believed Emily would eventually build a comfortable new life, surrounded by people who appreciated her gentle heart. Never once had he imagined finding her cleaning hotel rooms while expecting a child. That night, Ryan stood alone inside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his luxury penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. His dining table remained untouched. Business reports lay unopened beside his laptop. Instead of preparing for another investor conference, he found himself replaying every conversation he had shared with Emily earlier that afternoon. She never complained. She never blamed him. She never asked for sympathy. Somehow that silence hurt more than anger ever could. The following morning Ryan arrived at his corporate headquarters earlier than anyone else. His executive assistant, Olivia Bennett, entered carrying the day's schedule. "Your breakfast meeting with the New York investors begins in 30 minutes, she said before noticing the unusual expression on his face. "Is everything all right?" Ryan hesitated. "Olivia, I need you to find something out for me." She waited quietly. "A woman named Emily Carter works at the Grand Regent Hotel. I need to know how long she has been there." Olivia nodded without asking unnecessary questions. "I will see what I can find." Throughout the morning Ryan struggled to focus on presentations that would normally have commanded his full attention. Executives discussed expansion into new markets while legal advisors reviewed acquisition documents. But every mention of long-term planning reminded him of someone who had once believed in every dream he shared before success changed him. Around lunchtime Olivia returned carrying a small folder. "I only found public information," she explained. "The hotel protects employee privacy." Ryan accepted the folder immediately. Inside were only a few basic employment records and publicly available references. Emily had worked at the Grand Regent for almost 2 years. Her attendance record was nearly perfect. She had received multiple employee recognition awards for guest service and teamwork. Several handwritten commendations from hotel guests had been included in annual staff newsletters praising her kindness and professionalism. Ryan slowly turned another page. "That is all?" Olivia nodded. "There is one more thing." Ryan looked up. "The Human Resources Director described her as someone who volunteers for difficult shifts whenever another employee has a family emergency." Ryan quietly closed the folder. The description sounded painfully familiar. Emily had always placed other people before herself. He remembered winter mornings when she quietly shoveled an elderly neighbor's driveway before leaving for work because she worried the woman might slip on the ice. He remembered birthday gifts she secretly bought for children whose parents struggled financially. Back then Ryan admired those gestures without realizing they revealed the deepest parts of her character. Success had gradually taught him to notice profits before people. Emily had never learned that lesson. Later that afternoon Ryan returned to the hotel under the simple excuse of reviewing renovation plans connected to the investment project. In truth, he wanted answers. As he entered the employee corridor leading toward the executive suites, he heard quiet laughter coming from the housekeeping supply room. Curious, he paused just outside the open doorway. Inside, several hotel employees sat around a small table during their lunch break. Emily unpacked homemade sandwiches from a cloth bag and carefully divided them into several portions. "You made lunch for everyone again?" one young housekeeper asked with a grateful smile. Emily laughed softly. "I accidentally cooked too much." Another employee shook his head. "You always accidentally cook too much." Everyone around the table smiled knowingly. Ryan watched and noticed as Emily encouraged a nervous new employee preparing for her first week on the job. "Do not worry about making everything perfect," Emily said warmly. "Guests remember kindness much longer than they remember tiny mistakes." The young woman smiled with visible relief. "Thank you. I needed to hear that today." Ryan quietly stepped away before anyone noticed him listening. He continued walking through the service hallway until he reached the hotel's indoor garden where guests rarely ventured during weekday afternoons. Minutes later he saw Emily again, carefully watering fresh flowers arranged around a small seating area. "I thought housekeeping only cleaned rooms," Ryan said gently as he approached. Emily smiled without surprise. "Sometimes I help wherever I am needed." Ryan looked around the peaceful garden. "Everyone here seems to care about you." Emily adjusted one of the flower arrangements before answering. "We spend many hours together every day. Kindness has a way of growing when people help one another." Ryan studied her expression carefully. "Emily, can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Why did you never tell me where you were after the divorce?" Emily remained quiet for several seconds before answering with complete honesty. "Because I believed you deserved the freedom to move forward without feeling responsible for my choices." Ryan frowned. "But this life," Emily gently interrupted him. Do not mistake simple work for a miserable life. Her calm words stopped him completely. She looked around the quiet garden with peaceful contentment before continuing. Every room I clean becomes a place where someone rests after a difficult journey. Every guest I help leaves carrying a better memory of this city. Every coworker I encourage gains a little more confidence. There is dignity in honest work, Ryan. Before he could respond, the soft sound of the hotel's service bell echoed through the hallway. Emily smiled apologetically. That is my next assignment. She picked up her housekeeping cart once again, thanked the gardener for allowing her to water the flowers, and disappeared toward another corridor with the same steady grace that had followed her through every ordinary moment. Ryan remained standing alone beneath the glass ceiling, beginning to understand that the greatest difference between him and Emily had never been wealth at all. It was that she had found purpose in serving others, while he was only now beginning to search for his own. Ryan returned to the Grand Regent Hotel again the following afternoon, but this time he carried no business agenda and requested no conference room. He simply walked through the familiar marble lobby with quiet purpose, hoping to understand the woman whose life had become a mystery to him. The elegant hotel remained as busy as ever. Bellhops welcomed arriving families, business travelers hurried toward meeting rooms, and the soft melody of a grand piano drifted through the air beneath towering crystal chandeliers. Yet Ryan noticed something different now. His attention no longer settled on luxury or architecture. Instead, he found himself watching the people Emily interacted with. It did not take long to find her. She stood near the concierge desk helping an elderly guest whose suitcase had lost the wheel. Rather than calling someone else, Emily patiently helped transfer the man's belongings into another suitcase provided by the hotel before walking him personally toward the elevator. The gentleman smiled gratefully. Young lady, he said warmly, I have stayed in hotels all over the country, and I have never met anyone kinder than you. Emily laughed softly. You are very kind to say that. I hope you enjoy the rest of your visit. The man nodded before disappearing into the elevator. Ryan remained several steps away, quietly observing. Moments later another employee hurried toward Emily carrying a clipboard. Miss Carter, the young receptionist said nervously. A family checking into room 1520 accidentally left important medication in the airport shuttle. They are very worried. Emily immediately stopped what she was doing. Call the shuttle company and ask them to hold the vehicle. I will contact the airport desk while you reassure the family that we are working on it. Within minutes she had coordinated several phone calls, comforted the anxious guests, and arranged for the medication to be delivered back to the hotel before sunset. The grateful parents thanked her repeatedly while their small daughter wrapped her arms around Emily's waist in an innocent hug. Emily gently smiled and wished them a pleasant vacation. Ryan could not remember ever seeing her seek recognition after helping someone. She simply returned to her housekeeping cart and continued working as though kindness required no applause. Curious, Ryan approached the front desk where the hotel manager, Linda Foster, reviewed several reservation files. May I ask you something about Miss Carter? He said politely. Linda smiled immediately. Of course. Ryan hesitated before choosing his words carefully. Everyone here seems to admire her. Linda looked toward Emily with unmistakable respect. That is because she earned it. Ryan remained silent, allowing her to continue. When Emily first came here nearly 2 years ago, she applied for the most basic housekeeping position. She never mentioned her past. She never asked for special treatment. She simply said she needed honest work. Linda smiled faintly. Within weeks she was helping train new employees even though it was not part of her job. Whenever someone became sick, Emily volunteered to cover the shift. When one of our housekeepers lost her apartment after a fire, Emily quietly organized donations without putting her own name on anything. Ryan frowned gently. She never told anyone? Linda shook her head. Most of us only found out because other employees eventually talked about it. Ryan glanced toward Emily again as she carefully arranged fresh flowers beside the lobby entrance. She could probably do something much easier. Linda answered without hesitation. Many people have offered her opportunities. Ryan looked surprised. Offered? Linda nodded. Guests have recommended office jobs. One retired executive even offered to help her start a small business after seeing how organized she was. Ryan waited for the rest of the story. She thanked every one of them, Linda said, but politely declined. Ryan felt another question forming. Do you know why? Linda smiled thoughtfully. She once told me that every season of life teaches something different, and she wanted to finish the season she was living before beginning another. The answer lingered in Ryan's thoughts long after Linda returned to her work. As he walked toward the indoor garden once again, he noticed a maintenance employee struggling to move several heavy boxes onto a storage cart. Before anyone asked, Emily quietly stepped beside him. Although visibly pregnant, she did not attempt to lift the boxes herself. Instead, she organized the load, found another employee to assist safely, and encouraged both men with the same calm confidence she showed everyone else. She always found a way to help without drawing attention to herself. Later that afternoon, Ryan sat alone inside the hotel cafe overlooking the lobby. From his table he could see Emily greeting guests, helping coworkers, and moving patiently through one responsibility after another. Hours passed before she finally took a short break. She purchased nothing except a simple cup of hot tea before sitting quietly beside the window. There were no expensive meals, no complaints about long hours, and no visible frustration. She simply watched autumn leaves drift outside for a few peaceful minutes before returning to work with renewed energy. Ryan realized something that unsettled him even more than seeing her in a housekeeping uniform. Emily did not behave like someone waiting to be rescued. She behaved like someone who had already made peace with her life. That realization raised an even greater question inside his heart. If she had chosen this path willingly, then what hidden reason could possibly be important enough for a woman of such quiet dignity to remain cleaning hotel rooms while carrying a child completely on her own? The question followed Ryan everywhere during the next several days. Why would Emily choose to remain in a housekeeping position when everyone around her believed she was capable of so much more? The answer refused to reveal itself, yet every visit to the Grand Regent Hotel uncovered another small piece of a puzzle that only made the mystery deeper. Late on Thursday afternoon, Ryan returned once again under the excuse of reviewing construction plans connected to the investment agreement. Even the hotel manager smiled knowingly when she saw him enter. "Back again, Mr. Brooks?" Linda Foster asked warmly. Ryan returned a polite smile. "I wanted to check on a few details before the renovation proposal moves forward." Linda nodded without questioning him further. She had already begun to suspect that the renovation project was no longer the real reason for his visits. As Ryan walked through the employee corridor, he heard several staff members laughing softly inside the break room. Emily sat near the window with a small notebook open beside her untouched cup of tea. Around the table were 4 younger employees listening carefully while she explained something with patient enthusiasm. "Guests rarely remember whether the hallway smelled like lemon or lavender," Emily said with a gentle smile. "They remember whether someone looked them in the eyes, remembered their name, or helped them when they were having a difficult day. Kindness stays in people's memories much longer than perfection." One of the younger housekeepers nodded thoughtfully. "That is why everyone keeps asking for you." Emily laughed quietly and shook her head. "No. They ask for people who make them feel welcome. All of us can become that person." Ryan remained outside the doorway just long enough to hear those words before stepping away. She was not simply cleaning rooms. She was quietly shaping the culture of everyone around her. Later that afternoon, he found Linda reviewing employee schedules inside her office. "May I ask another question?" Ryan said. Linda smiled knowingly. "I thought you might." Ryan hesitated. Several people mentioned that Emily turned down other opportunities. "Is that true?" Linda leaned back thoughtfully. "More than once." She opened a desk drawer and removed a small folder. "About 8 months ago, one of our regular guests owned a successful interior design company. She offered Emily a management position with almost triple the salary." Ryan looked surprised. "Emily refused?" Linda nodded. Very politely. Did she explain why? Linda smiled faintly. She only said she had not yet finished what she came here to do. Ryan frowned. What did she mean? Linda slowly shook her head. She never explained. The answer only deepened Ryan's curiosity. Before leaving the office, he noticed a framed photograph hanging on the wall beside several employee awards. It showed the entire hotel staff gathered during the previous Christmas season. In the center stood Emily holding several wrapped gifts while dozens of children smiled around her. What was that event? Ryan asked. Linda followed his gaze and smiled warmly. Emily organized it. Organized what? Every December our employees collect toys for families staying at the hotel after unexpected emergencies. Emily started the tradition during her first winter here. She said no child should spend Christmas feeling forgotten. Ryan studied the photograph carefully. Emily looked exactly the way he remembered her years earlier. Not proud. Not seeking attention. Simply happy because other people were smiling. Linda quietly added another detail. She never lets us put her name on the charity announcements. Ryan lowered his eyes. That sounds like her. As he continued through the hotel that evening, Ryan noticed another unusual scene. Near the employee entrance, a delivery driver struggled to unload several large boxes of donated blankets intended for a local shelter. Emily was already there directing 2 maintenance workers while carefully checking every inventory list. She did not attempt to carry anything heavy because of her pregnancy, but she coordinated the entire effort with calm efficiency. Within minutes, everything had been organized and loaded for transportation. Perfect, Emily said with a grateful smile. Now the shelter will receive everything before tonight's temperature drops. One volunteer thanked her sincerely. You always remember the details, Emily answered with quiet simplicity. The details matter because people matter. Ryan stood silently in the distance, hearing words that somehow reached far deeper than any business speech he had ever attended. Just before leaving the hotel, he paused near the lobby cafe where an elderly gentleman slowly approached Emily using a cane. Ryan recognized him immediately as one of the hotel's long-term guests. Miss Carter, the gentleman said warmly. My daughter finally arrived safely this afternoon. Thank you for calling her when I became dizzy yesterday. Emily smiled with obvious relief. I am very happy she made it here. The gentleman reached into his pocket and quietly offered her an envelope. Emily gently pushed it back toward him. Thank you, but I cannot accept that. Please, he insisted. You helped me more than anyone else. Emily shook her head kindly. Seeing you with your family again is already enough. The gentleman's eyes filled with gratitude before he slowly walked away. Ryan remained frozen where he stood. Emily had refused another opportunity for money without hesitation. As she quietly returned to arranging fresh flowers beside the reception desk, Ryan finally realized the mystery surrounding her had nothing to do with poverty at all. Whatever had brought Emily to this hotel was not desperation. It was purpose, and somewhere beneath that quiet purpose lay a truth he had not yet begun to understand. Ryan stopped trying to convince himself that his repeated visits to the Grand Regent Hotel were connected to business. Every meeting with investors had already been completed, every contract had been signed, yet he continued returning almost every afternoon. Something inside him refused to leave until he understood why Emily had chosen a life that appeared so ordinary despite possessing extraordinary character. One rainy Friday evening, the hotel lobby grew unusually busy as guests hurried inside carrying umbrellas while thunder rolled softly across the Chicago skyline. Ryan sat quietly in the lounge overlooking the reception area with a cup of untouched coffee. From his seat he watched Emily move calmly through the growing crowd, helping an elderly couple reach the elevators before guiding a confused family toward the conference center. Even under pressure, she never hurried anyone. She somehow made every person feel as though they were the only guest in the building. Nearly an hour later the storm intensified. A maintenance employee rushed toward Linda Foster with obvious concern. The community shelter just called, he said. Their roof started leaking during the storm. Several families need temporary housing tonight. Linda immediately began reviewing available rooms. We are almost completely booked, she whispered anxiously. Before anyone else could respond, Emily quietly stepped forward. The unused employee training rooms can be prepared within 30 minutes, she suggested. The folding beds from storage will fit, and the housekeeping team can gather extra blankets. Linda looked relieved. That could actually work. Emily smiled gently. Then let us begin. Ryan watched the next hour unfold with growing amazement. Emily organized volunteers, coordinated housekeeping schedules, contacted the hotel kitchen for warm meals, and welcomed frightened families arriving through the employee entrance without making anyone feel embarrassed about accepting help. Small children received coloring books from the hotel gift shop. Elderly guests were escorted carefully to comfortable rooms. Every detail seemed to appear naturally because Emily quietly anticipated what people would need before they asked. After the last family settled inside, Ryan found Linda standing alone near the reception desk. Does she always do this? He asked quietly. Linda smiled with tired admiration. Almost every time someone needs help. Ryan looked toward Emily, who was now folding blankets alongside several coworkers despite everyone insisting she should rest because of her pregnancy. Where did she learn to care for people like this? Linda remained silent for a moment before answering. I think life taught her. Ryan sensed there was more behind those words. You know something, do not you? Linda hesitated before looking toward the quiet hallway to make certain nobody else could hear. Emily asked me never to discuss her private life. Ryan nodded respectfully. I understand. Linda folded her hands thoughtfully. There is one thing I believe she would not mind me telling you. Ryan listened carefully. The day Emily came here looking for work, she had only one small suitcase, a folder of personal documents, and enough money to pay for a modest motel room for 2 nights. Ryan frowned in surprise. That was all? Linda nodded slowly. She looked exhausted, but she never asked anyone for charity. She simply asked whether honest work was available. Ryan struggled to imagine Emily arriving alone with so little. Linda continued softly. Our hotel had already filled every housekeeping position. I almost turned her away. What changed? Ryan asked. Linda smiled faintly. While she was leaving, one of our oldest employees collapsed in the lobby because of low blood sugar. Emily immediately stayed with her, called emergency services, comforted the woman's husband, and remained at the hospital until family members arrived. Ryan listened without interrupting. The next morning I called Emily back and offered her the first position that became available. She accepted with tears in her eyes. Ryan looked toward Emily once again. She was laughing softly with 2 children whose parents had just settled into temporary rooms for the night. She never told anyone any of this? Linda shook her head. Never. Ryan quietly asked the question that had been growing inside him for days. If she only needed work, why stay here for almost 2 years? Linda smiled gently before answering. Because after she was hired, Emily made me a promise. Ryan waited. She told me that someone had offered her a chance to stand again when she had almost nothing left. She said she would remain here until she felt she had given back at least as much kindness as she had received. Ryan felt those words settle deeply inside his heart. She stayed because of gratitude? Linda nodded. Not because she had to. Because she wanted to honor the people who believed in her when life became difficult. Ryan lowered his eyes. Suddenly every rejected job offer, every extra shift, every volunteer project, and every act of quiet service made perfect sense. Emily had never remained because she lacked opportunities. She remained because loyalty meant more to her than comfort. As the storm outside finally began to fade, Ryan watched Emily help one frightened little girl place a stuffed bear beside a temporary bed before gently wishing her good night. Standing in the warm glow of the hotel lights, surrounded by people whose lives she quietly made better every single day, Emily looked richer in character than anyone Ryan had ever met, and for the first time he began to wonder whether the greatest poverty in his own life had never been about money at all, but about failing to recognize the priceless heart he had once been trusted to protect. The rain had disappeared by the following morning, leaving the city washed clean beneath a bright blue autumn sky. Ryan arrived at the Grand Regent Hotel earlier than usual, carrying no briefcase and asking no one to prepare a meeting room. He simply walked through the quiet lobby where fresh flowers had already been arranged beside the reception desk and soft piano music drifted through the peaceful morning air. The hotel felt different after everything Linda had shared the night before. Every hallway now seemed filled with reminders of Emily's quiet influence. Employees greeted one another more warmly. Guests smiled more easily. Small acts of kindness appeared almost ordinary because she had quietly turned them into part of the hotel's daily rhythm. Ryan found Emily organizing fresh linens beside the housekeeping office before the morning rush began. She looked slightly tired, yet the gentle smile on her face remained unchanged. "Good morning," he said softly. Emily looked up and smiled politely. "Good morning, Ryan." He noticed a medical appointment reminder resting on top of her housekeeping schedule. Before he could stop himself, he asked, "Everything all right?" Emily glanced at the card and nodded. "Just a routine prenatal checkup this afternoon." Ryan smiled with visible relief. "That is good." Emily carefully placed the reminder back into her folder before continuing her work. "The baby is healthy." Those simple words somehow stayed with Ryan long after she returned to arranging supplies. Around noon, as hotel activity slowed briefly between checkout and afternoon arrivals, Ryan happened to pass the employee entrance just as Emily prepared to leave for her appointment. She carried only a small handbag and wore the same modest beige uniform beneath a light cardigan. Seeing her about to walk toward the city bus stop surprised him. He stepped forward carefully. "Emily, are you taking the bus?" She smiled naturally. "Yes. The clinic is only a few miles away." Ryan hesitated. "Would you allow me to drive you?" Emily looked thoughtful for a moment before gently shaking her head. "Thank you, but I will be fine." Before Ryan could respond, Linda Foster approached carrying several folders. "Emily," she said kindly, "I already approved your afternoon leave. Take all the time you need." Emily thanked her warmly before heading outside. Ryan remained standing beneath the hotel entrance watching her walk toward the nearby bus shelter. Something inside him refused to let the moment end that way. Without another thought, he quietly followed several minutes later, parking his car across the street from the medical clinic. He had no intention of intruding. He simply wanted to know she arrived safely. The clinic occupied a modest brick building serving expectant mothers throughout the neighborhood. Ryan remained outside near a small coffee shop while Emily disappeared through the front entrance. Nearly an hour passed before the clinic doors opened again. Emily stepped outside holding a sealed medical envelope while speaking with her physician, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, near the entrance. Ryan remained hidden behind a row of parked cars, intending to leave without being noticed. Then a sudden gust of wind swept across the sidewalk. Several papers slipped from the doctor's clipboard and scattered across the pavement. Ryan instinctively hurried forward to help gather them. "Thank you," Dr. Mitchell said gratefully as Ryan handed the papers back. Emily looked up in surprise. "Ryan?" He smiled awkwardly. "I was nearby." Before anyone could continue the conversation, Dr. Mitchell glanced between them with obvious recognition. "Oh," she said warmly. "You must be the father." The world seemed to stop. Ryan stared silently at the doctor. Emily closed her eyes briefly as though realizing the conversation had reached a moment she had hoped to postpone. Dr. Mitchell noticed the sudden silence and looked confused. "I am sorry," she said carefully. "I assumed," Emily gently interrupted with remarkable calm. "It is all right, doctor." Ryan slowly turned toward Emily, struggling to find his voice. "What did she mean?" Emily held the medical envelope quietly against her chest. She did not panic. She did not deny what had just been said. Instead, she looked directly into Ryan's eyes with a sadness that carried years of silent strength. "She meant exactly what you think she meant." Ryan felt his heartbeat quicken. "Emily," she spoke softly before he could continue, "the baby I am carrying is yours." Every sound surrounding the busy sidewalk faded into silence. Passing cars, distant conversations, and rustling autumn leaves all disappeared beneath the weight of a single truth. Ryan searched her face, hoping somehow he had misunderstood. "That is impossible," he whispered, though even as he spoke the words, memories returned with painful clarity. After signing the divorce papers, they had met one final evening to complete the remaining legal paperwork and quietly say goodbye to the life they once shared. Neither of them imagined it would be the last time they would ever stand together as husband and wife. Emily lowered her eyes gently. "A few weeks later, I learned I was pregnant." Ryan struggled to breathe. "Why did you never tell me?" Emily remained silent for several seconds before answering with heartbreaking honesty. "Because when I looked at your life, I saw a man already walking toward a future he believed he wanted. I could not bear the thought of wondering whether you stayed because you loved us or because you felt trapped by responsibility." Ryan stood speechless as Emily carefully rested one hand against the life growing beneath her heart. In that quiet moment outside an ordinary neighborhood clinic, the greatest mystery surrounding her finally disappeared, only to reveal a truth far more overwhelming than anything Ryan had imagined. Because the child he believed belonged to another man had been carrying his own last name all along. Ryan remained frozen on the sidewalk long after Dr. Sarah Mitchell quietly excused herself and returned inside the clinic. The city around them continued moving as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Cars passed through the intersection. Pedestrians crossed the street carrying shopping bags. Somewhere in the distance a train sounded its familiar horn. Yet for Ryan, time had divided into two separate lives. One existed before Emily spoke those words. The other had begun the moment she quietly admitted that the child she carried was his. Emily looked at him with calm understanding. She had imagined this moment many times over the past several months, but no amount of preparation could make it easier. "Would you like to sit down?" she asked gently. Ryan nodded almost automatically. They walked together toward a small public garden beside the clinic where several wooden benches overlooked a quiet pond surrounded by autumn trees. Neither of them spoke until they were seated beneath the golden leaves. Ryan stared at the medical envelope still resting in Emily's hands. "How far along are you?" he finally asked. "Almost 32 weeks," she answered softly. Ryan calculated the months in silence before looking back at her. "After the divorce paperwork?" Emily nodded. "Yes." Ryan closed his eyes briefly. He remembered that evening with painful clarity now. They had met to sign the final property transfer documents. Neither of them argued. Neither blamed the other. They simply shared dinner afterward because neither wanted the final goodbye to happen across a conference table filled with legal papers. It had been a quiet evening filled with old memories, gentle conversation, and the sadness of two people who still cared about one another but no longer believed they could repair what had been broken. They parted believing they would never see each other again. A few weeks later, Emily discovered she was expecting their child. Ryan slowly looked toward her. "You carried this alone for 8 months." Emily smiled faintly. "Not entirely alone." Ryan frowned. "What do you mean?" "The people at the hotel became my family." She looked toward the pond where ducks drifted peacefully across the water. "Linda checked on me after every doctor's appointment. My coworkers insisted on carrying heavy supplies before I even had to ask. The kitchen staff always made certain I had healthy meals during long shifts." She smiled warmly at the memories. "There was always someone nearby." Ryan listened quietly. The image hurt more than he expected. Strangers had stood beside Emily during one of the most important chapters of her life, while he remained completely unaware that the chapter even existed. "But I should have been there," he whispered. Emily did not disagree. She simply answered honestly. "Perhaps." Ryan looked at her with visible regret. "Emily, I had a right to know." She met his eyes without anger. "You also had the right to build the future you believed was best for you." Ryan shook his head. "That was never more important than my child." Emily's expression softened. "You say that now because you know the truth." She paused before continuing. Back then, I saw someone who had finally achieved everything he spent years chasing. I did not want my pregnancy to become something you felt obligated to carry out of guilt." Ryan leaned forward, resting his hands together, as he struggled to process everything. "You should have trusted me enough to let me decide," Emily answered with quiet honesty. "Maybe." She looked down at her wedding ring, now hanging from a delicate silver chain around her neck instead of resting on her finger. "Or maybe I was simply afraid of hearing an answer that would break my heart even more." Those words settled between them like the autumn leaves slowly falling around the bench. Ryan realized that while he had spent 3 years believing Emily moved on with her life, she had spent the same years carrying pain he never bothered to imagine. After several long moments, he spoke again. "Does anyone else know?" Emily nodded. "Only Dr. Mitchell, Linda, and one attorney who prepared legal documents in case anything ever happened to me." Ryan looked startled. "Legal documents?" Emily opened the medical envelope and carefully removed several papers. Among them was a sealed letter with his full name written neatly across the front. "This was prepared months ago," she explained. "If there had ever been an emergency during the birth, Linda knew to give this to you." Ryan accepted the unopened envelope with trembling hands. "You planned to tell me eventually." Emily smiled sadly. "I never intended to keep our child from you forever. I only wanted to wait until I believed you could choose fatherhood because you truly wanted it, not because circumstances forced you." Ryan carefully held the letter against his chest without opening it. He understood now that every decision Emily had made had been guided not by revenge or pride, but by fear of becoming a burden to someone she once loved. The realization filled him with a deeper sadness than any accusation ever could. As the afternoon sun settled lower behind the trees, Ryan looked toward Emily with a sincerity she had not seen in years. "I cannot change the months I already missed," he said quietly. "But if you will allow me, I do not want to miss another single day from this moment forward." Emily searched his face without answering immediately. She had learned through experience that promises spoken during emotional moments were easy. Living those promises every ordinary day was something entirely different, and somewhere beyond the quiet garden where they now sat, another truth still waited to be uncovered, one that would force Ryan to question not only the choices Emily had made after their divorce, but everything he believed he knew about the life they had once shared together. Ryan did not open the sealed letter immediately. He held it carefully in both hands as he and Emily walked back toward the hotel in thoughtful silence. The late afternoon sunlight stretched long shadows across the sidewalks while autumn leaves drifted gently around them. Every few steps Ryan glanced toward Emily, still struggling to accept that the woman beside him had carried their child through months of uncertainty without asking anything from him. When they reached the Grand Region Hotel, Emily paused near the employee entrance. "I should finish my shift," she said softly. Ryan looked at the envelope once more. "May I read this now?" Emily nodded. "It was always meant for you." She gave him one final gentle smile before disappearing inside the building. Ryan remained outside for several moments before walking toward the quiet hotel garden where they had spoken many times over the past week. He sat beneath the same maple tree and slowly opened the envelope. Inside rested a neatly folded handwritten letter along with copies of several legal documents prepared months earlier. Ryan unfolded the letter first. Emily's familiar handwriting immediately brought back memories of birthday cards, anniversary notes, and encouraging messages she once left beside his morning coffee before he rushed to work. The first sentence stopped him completely. "If you are reading this, it means life finally gave us the conversation I prayed would happen face to face instead of through these pages." Ryan continued reading with trembling hands. Emily explained that she had never wanted their child to grow up believing either parent hated the other. She wrote that if anything unexpected happened during childbirth, she wanted Ryan to know the truth without carrying unnecessary guilt. She thanked him for believing in her dreams during the happiest years of their marriage and admitted that despite everything they had lost, she had never wished failure upon him. Ryan quietly lowered the letter for a moment, overwhelmed by the absence of bitterness in every word. Then another folded document slipped from the envelope onto the bench beside him. It was a copy of an old bank transaction dated nearly 3 years earlier, shortly before Walker Technologies narrowly escaped a devastating financial crisis. Ryan frowned in confusion. He remembered that difficult season well. One of his largest investors had unexpectedly withdrawn support, leaving the company only days away from missing critical payroll obligations. Somehow emergency funding had appeared through an anonymous bridge loan arranged by the bank. At the time, Ryan believed a private financial institution had quietly stepped in. Attached to the transaction record was another document showing the original source of those funds. Ryan stared at the page without breathing. The account holder's name read Emily Carter. His heart began racing. Impossible. He quickly turned to the remaining pages. Additional financial statements revealed that Emily had liquidated nearly every personal investment she owned during that same month. Savings, retirement accounts, family inheritance. Even a small vacation property she had inherited from her late grandmother had been sold. Every dollar had been transferred into the emergency account that ultimately saved Walker Technologies from collapse. Ryan felt the world around him disappear. At that exact moment, an older voice quietly spoke behind him. "I wondered when you would finally learn the truth." Ryan turned quickly. His father, Richard Brooks, stood several feet away holding his coat against the cool autumn breeze. Ryan rose immediately. "Dad?" Richard walked toward the bench with a heavy expression. "Emily asked me never to tell you unless circumstances made silence more harmful than honesty." Ryan held up the financial documents. "These cannot be real." Richard nodded slowly. "They are." Ryan looked back at the papers. "She saved the company?" Richard answered quietly. "She saved your employees. She knew that if Walker Technologies failed, hundreds of families would lose their income." Ryan struggled to process what he was hearing. "Why did nobody tell me?" Richard sighed deeply before sitting beside his son. "Because Emily made me promise." Ryan stared at him in disbelief. Richard continued. "She came to my office the day after the investors withdrew. You were exhausted, angry, and determined to solve everything alone. She knew you would never accept her money voluntarily." Ryan lowered his eyes. His father was right. Back then his pride had been stronger than his willingness to receive help. "She asked me to arrange the funding anonymously through the bank," Richard said. "She insisted you should believe the company survived because of your leadership, not because of her sacrifice." Ryan closed his eyes as painful memories returned. He remembered celebrating the unexpected financing with his executive team. He remembered thanking anonymous lenders during interviews. All the while, the woman he loved had quietly surrendered nearly everything she owned without asking for recognition. Richard reached into his coat pocket and removed one final item. It was a faded receipt from the sale of Emily's grandmother's lakeside cottage. "She cried after signing those papers," Richard admitted softly. "Not because she lost the property. She cried because it was the last gift her grandmother ever left her." Ryan could no longer speak. Richard looked toward the hotel entrance where Emily had disappeared earlier. "She never saved your company because she expected gratitude," he said. "She did it because she believed the people working there deserved another chance." The quiet garden suddenly felt impossibly still. Ryan realized that every success he had celebrated over the past 3 years rested partly upon a sacrifice made by the very woman he believed had simply walked away from his life. And as the last rays of sunlight settled across the hotel grounds, he understood that the deepest wound was not discovering how much Emily had given up for him. It was realizing she had carried every sacrifice in complete silence while allowing him to believe he had achieved everything entirely on his own. Ryan remained in the hotel garden long after his father quietly walked away. The financial documents rested on the bench beside him, but he no longer needed to read them again. Every number had already carved itself into his memory. Emily had sold nearly everything she owned to protect a company that no longer even belonged to both of them. She had surrendered the last physical reminder of her grandmother, remained completely anonymous, and then walked away without asking for gratitude ownership, or recognition. Ryan looked across the quiet hotel courtyard where guests laughed over afternoon coffee beneath colorful umbrellas. The world appeared exactly the same as it had only an hour earlier. Yet inside him, every definition of success had collapsed. That evening he returned to Walker Technologies for the first time since learning the truth. The headquarters still reflected everything he had once admired. Glass walls, modern architecture, innovation awards, framed magazine covers, photographs celebrating milestones that investors praised every year. Ryan slowly walked through the executive hallway until he stopped in front of the largest display recognizing the company's remarkable recovery 3 years earlier. Beneath the photograph was a simple plaque celebrating visionary leadership during difficult financial circumstances. Ryan stared at the words for a long time before quietly removing the plaque from the wall. Olivia Bennett happened to step into the hallway carrying several reports. "Is something wrong?" she asked gently. Ryan looked at the empty space where the plaque had hung. "This achievement never belonged to me alone." Olivia studied his expression but asked no further questions. She had never seen him look so humbled. The following morning Ryan called an executive leadership meeting. Senior managers, department directors, and board advisors gathered inside the main conference room expecting another strategic announcement. Instead, Ryan stood quietly at the front of the room without presentation slides or financial charts. "Before we begin today's agenda," he said calmly, "there is something I should have said years ago." The room became completely silent. "Many people have congratulated me for leading this company through our greatest financial crisis." He paused briefly. "The truth is that Walker Technologies survived because someone else made a sacrifice I never knew about until yesterday." Several executives exchanged confused glances. Ryan continued honestly. "I cannot reveal every private detail because that story belongs to someone whose dignity deserves protection. But I can tell you this. The greatest act of leadership I have ever witnessed was performed by someone who asked for absolutely nothing in return." Nobody interrupted. Ryan looked around the room filled with employees who had trusted him for years. "From this day forward, this company will measure success differently." He announced expanded parental leave, emergency family assistance funds, employee hardship grants, and new scholarship programs for workers continuing their education. He also created an anonymous employee relief fund so anyone facing unexpected hardship could receive support without embarrassment. "No one should ever have to carry impossible burdens alone," he said quietly. After the meeting ended, Mark Reynolds approached him. "These changes are extraordinary," he admitted. "What made you decide all of this so suddenly?" Ryan smiled faintly. "Because I finally met someone who taught me what leadership actually looks like." That afternoon he returned once more to the Grand Regent Hotel. Emily had just finished arranging fresh flowers near the lobby entrance when she noticed him approaching. "You came back," she said softly. Ryan nodded. "I needed to see you." Emily noticed the calm seriousness in his expression. "Would you like to walk for a few minutes?" They stepped into the peaceful indoor garden where sunlight filtered gently through the glass ceiling. Ryan carried a small envelope in his hand. Emily looked at it curiously. "What is that?" Ryan handed it to her. "A copy of the new employee assistance program we launched this morning." Emily quietly read through the first page. Her eyes widened slightly as she noticed family support benefits, emergency financial assistance, and expanded parental leave. "Ryan," he gently interrupted her, "I know this cannot repay what you gave up." Emily looked up from the papers. "I never asked to be repaid." Ryan nodded. "I know." He took a slow breath before continuing. "That is exactly why I finally understand what you did." Emily carefully folded the documents. "These changes will help many families. That is the hope." Ryan looked directly into her eyes. "You taught me that companies do not exist only to earn profits. They exist because real people trust them with their lives." Emily remained quiet for several moments before offering a small smile. "I am proud of you." Those 4 words affected Ryan more deeply than every business award he had ever received. They were not spoken because he had become richer. They were spoken because he had finally begun becoming wiser. He lowered his eyes before speaking again. Emily, I am not here to ask you to erase the past. She listened patiently. I am not asking you to return to our marriage. I am not asking you to forget the years we lost. He paused briefly. I am only asking for one opportunity to become the father our child deserves and the man I should have become long ago. Emily looked toward the garden where afternoon sunlight reflected across the quiet fountain. She could hear complete sincerity in every word, but she also understood that true change was measured over time, not within a single emotional conversation. As she gently rested one hand over the child growing inside her, she realized that forgiveness had never been the most difficult choice. The greater question was whether two people shaped by the same painful past could build an entirely different future, one ordinary day at a time. The days that followed unfolded with a quiet rhythm neither Ryan nor Emily had expected. There were no dramatic declarations and no attempts to force trust to return overnight. Instead, Ryan appeared consistently in the small moments that most people overlooked. Every Tuesday evening after Emily finished her shift, he waited outside the employee entrance with a warm cup of herbal tea recommended by Dr. Sarah Mitchell. Some evenings Emily accepted it with a grateful smile. Other evenings she already had one waiting inside. Ryan never seemed disappointed either way. He had finally understood that earning trust meant respecting another person's choices instead of trying to control them. Weeks passed as late autumn slowly gave way to the first signs of winter. Walker Technologies continued operating successfully, but Ryan's daily routine changed in ways his employees quickly noticed. Rather than spending every evening entertaining investors, he left the office on time several days each week. He attended parenting classes recommended by the clinic, read books about newborn care, and quietly learned everything he could about becoming a father. Olivia Bennett smiled one afternoon after finding several parenting guides stacked neatly beside financial reports on Ryan's desk. That is a different kind of business strategy, she joked gently. Ryan laughed for the first time in many days. Probably the most important investment I have ever made. At the Grand Regent Hotel, Emily continued working with the same quiet dedication despite her growing pregnancy. Her coworkers insisted on carrying heavier supplies while she focused on organizing guest requests, training new employees, and helping wherever she safely could. Ryan never interfered with her work. Instead, he often arrived during her lunch break, bringing homemade soup prepared from recipes his own mother used when he was a child. Sometimes they shared 30 peaceful minutes inside the hotel garden discussing ordinary topics such as baby names, favorite childhood books, or the changing weather. Their conversations gradually became easier because neither of them tried to revisit old arguments. The past remained acknowledged without being allowed to dominate the present. One afternoon, Dr. Sarah Mitchell invited Ryan to attend Emily's prenatal appointment for the first time. Ryan looked toward Emily before answering. Only if you are comfortable with it. Emily smiled softly. I would not have invited you otherwise. Inside the examination room, Ryan listened quietly as the doctor explained the baby's healthy development. Then Dr. Mitchell switched on the ultrasound monitor. A tiny heartbeat filled the room with its steady rhythm. Ryan stared at the moving image on the screen, unable to speak. The little hands, the tiny feet, every gentle movement suddenly transformed fatherhood from an idea into someone real. Emily glanced toward him and noticed tears quietly forming in his eyes. Ryan whispered almost to himself, I cannot believe that is our child. Dr. Mitchell smiled warmly. Your baby is doing beautifully. Ryan looked toward Emily with overwhelming gratitude. Thank you for allowing me to be here. Emily answered honestly. This moment belongs to both of us. As they left the clinic together, the first snowflakes of the season drifted gently through the cold afternoon air. Ryan opened the passenger door of his car, but Emily smiled apologetically. I promised Linda I would return for the evening shift. The hotel is hosting a holiday charity banquet tonight. Ryan nodded immediately. Then I will drive you. During the short drive they spoke very little, simply watching the snow settle across rooftops and city streets. When they arrived at the hotel, Ryan noticed dozens of volunteers carrying wrapped gifts into the ballroom. What is happening? he asked. Emily smiled. Every year we host families staying in emergency housing during the holidays. Tonight the children receive dinner and presents. Ryan watched her step from the car with careful movements before following her. Inside, the ballroom had been transformed into a warm winter celebration filled with decorated trees, handmade ornaments, and long tables prepared by hotel staff. Children laughed while volunteers welcomed families who had experienced unexpected hardships during the year. Emily quietly moved from table to table, making certain every child felt included. She remembered names, introduced shy children to one another, and thanked every volunteer personally. Ryan noticed that nobody treated her as merely another employee. Without formal authority, she naturally became the person everyone followed. Near the end of the evening, one little girl wearing a bright red sweater approached Emily carrying a handmade drawing. "This is for you," the child said shyly. Emily knelt carefully to receive it. The drawing showed a smiling woman surrounded by children beneath a large heart. Across the top, written in uneven crayon letters, were the words "Thank you for helping everyone." Emily hugged the little girl gently before placing the drawing against her heart. Ryan quietly watched from across the room. In that simple picture, drawn by the honest hands of a child, he saw a truth that no business award or newspaper headline had ever captured. Emily had spent years changing lives one quiet act of kindness at a time, asking for nothing except the chance to keep serving others. As the evening came to an end and the last families prepared to leave carrying gifts and warm meals, Ryan realized that becoming worthy of standing beside a woman like Emily would never be accomplished through apologies alone. It would require living every ordinary day with the same humility, compassion, and quiet consistency she had demonstrated all along, and for the first time in many years, that lifelong journey no longer felt like a burden. It felt like the greatest privilege he had ever been given. Another 3 weeks passed quietly as winter settled over Chicago. Snow covered the sidewalks surrounding the Grand Regent Hotel, and holiday decorations gave way to the calm rhythm of a new year. Emily's maternity leave was only days away. Her coworkers insisted that she spend more time supervising than working, but she still greeted every guest with the same gentle smile that had become a familiar comfort throughout the hotel. Ryan remained true to every promise he had made. He never pressured Emily to revisit the past. He never asked her to leave the hotel or accept financial support she had not requested. Instead, he respected her independence while making certain she never doubted that she and their child could depend on him whenever they chose. One crisp January morning, Ryan arrived at the hotel carrying 2 small paper bags. Inside one was Emily's favorite herbal tea. Inside the other rested a tiny pair of hand-knitted baby socks his mother had carefully made after learning she would soon become a grandmother. Emily smiled warmly when she saw them. "Your mother made these?" Ryan nodded. "She asked if you might accept them?" Emily gently ran her fingers across the soft fabric before smiling with quiet gratitude. "Please thank her for me. They are beautiful." At that moment Linda Foster approached carrying a folder filled with employee schedules. "Emily," she said kindly, "everything is arranged for your leave. Do not think about work. We will take care of everything." Emily laughed softly. "I know you will." Linda looked toward Ryan with a knowing smile before excusing herself. As they watched the busy lobby together, Ryan spoke carefully. "There is something I would like to ask." Emily turned toward him. "Go ahead. After the baby is born, I would like to be there from the very beginning if you are comfortable with that." Emily remained silent for a thoughtful moment. "You already have been there," she answered gently. Ryan looked confused. Emily smiled. "Not at the beginning of the pregnancy, but at the beginning of becoming the father our child deserves." Those words stayed with Ryan long after they walked toward the quiet hotel garden together. Snow rested lightly on the trees beyond the glass walls while the indoor fountain continued its peaceful rhythm. Emily sat on a nearby bench and looked toward him with calm sincerity. "There is something important I want us to decide before the baby arrives." Ryan listened carefully. "Our child deserves a peaceful home, even if that home exists in 2 different places." Ryan nodded immediately. "I agree." Emily continued. I do not want birthdays divided by resentment, or holidays filled with awkward silence. I want our son or daughter to grow up seeing two adults who respect each other enough to stand in the same room without reopening old wounds. Ryan answered without hesitation. That is exactly what I want too. Emily looked into his eyes, searching for any trace of the man she had once struggled to reach. Instead, she found someone quieter, more patient, and finally willing to listen before speaking. Ryan, she said softly, I need you to understand something clearly. He nodded. Forgiving the past does not automatically rebuild the marriage. Ryan smiled gently. I know. Do you? She asked kindly. Because many people confuse healing with returning. Ryan took a slow breath before answering. The first time we were husband and wife, I believed success meant building a company. I forgot that home also needed someone building it every day. He looked toward the snow beyond the windows. If life ever gives us another chance at anything, I do not want it to begin with old expectations. I want it to begin with honesty. Emily quietly considered his words. That is the only foundation that lasts. She reached into her handbag and removed a folded document before handing it to him. Ryan unfolded it carefully. It contained the hospital registration forms for the upcoming delivery. Near the bottom of the page, beneath emergency contact information, appeared his name. Ryan looked up with visible emotion. Emily. She smiled softly. I changed it yesterday. He struggled to find words. Thank you? Emily rested one hand over her pregnancy. Our child deserves to know that both parents were present from the very first day they truly understood what family meant. Ryan carefully folded the document and held it close. I will not let either of you down. Emily answered with the same quiet wisdom that had guided every difficult decision she made. Do not promise perfection. Ryan looked at her curiously. She smiled. Promise consistency. Ryan nodded slowly. Then I promise I will continue showing up, even on ordinary days when nobody notices. Emily's eyes softened. Those are the days that matter most. As they stood to leave the garden, the afternoon sunlight reflected gently across the snow outside. Hotel guests continued checking in, children laughed near the lobby fireplace, and co-workers greeted Emily with the affection she had earned through years of faithful service. Watching her surrounded by people whose lives she had quietly touched, Ryan finally understood that love was never proven through grand speeches or expensive gifts. It was revealed through thousands of ordinary choices repeated faithfully over time. And as they walked side by side back toward the busy hotel lobby, not as husband and wife but as two people preparing to welcome a child into the world with mutual respect, both of them sensed that the future no longer belonged to the mistakes they had survived. It belonged to the character they had chosen to build from them. The first light of February spread gently across Chicago as fresh snow rested quietly on rooftops and tree branches outside St. Matthew Medical Center. Inside the maternity wing, everything felt calm except for the quiet anticipation shared by the people waiting for a new life to arrive. Ryan sat in the waiting area holding the tiny pair of hand-knitted baby socks his mother had made weeks earlier. They rested carefully in his hands like a promise he intended to keep for the rest of his life. Richard Brooks sat beside him, saying very little. Neither man felt the need for unnecessary conversation. Some moments carried enough meaning without words. A nurse finally stepped into the waiting room with a warm smile. Mr. Brooks, she said gently, Emily is asking for you. Ryan stood immediately, his heart beat louder than every sound surrounding him. He followed the nurse through the quiet hallway until she opened the door to a softly lit recovery room. Ryan stepped inside and stopped completely. Emily rested comfortably against the raised hospital bed, looking tired but peaceful. In her arms lay a tiny baby wrapped in a soft white blanket, sleeping with complete trust in a world that had only just welcomed another beautiful beginning. Emily looked up and smiled with quiet happiness. Come meet your daughter. Ryan slowly walked toward the bed, almost afraid that moving too quickly might somehow disturb the perfect stillness filling the room. Emily carefully placed the baby into his waiting arms. The little girl opened her eyes for only a brief moment before wrapping her tiny fingers around one of his. Ryan smiled through tears he no longer tried to hide. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your father, and I promise you will never have to wonder whether you are loved." Emily watched silently, her own eyes filled with quiet emotion. There was no bitterness left between them. Only gratitude that this moment belonged to both of them. "Her name is Grace," Emily said softly. Ryan looked toward her with a smile. "It suits her perfectly." Richard quietly entered the room a few moments later, removing his hat before approaching the bed. He looked at his granddaughter with unmistakable pride before placing one gentle hand on Ryan's shoulder. "Some fortunes cannot be counted," he said quietly. Ryan nodded without looking away from Grace. "This is the first one I truly understand." The weeks that followed settled into a peaceful rhythm. Emily began maternity leave surrounded by friends from the Grand Regent Hotel who visited often with homemade meals, flowers, and handwritten cards. Linda Foster organized a small celebration inside the hotel lobby before Emily left, where every employee signed a memory book filled with photographs, messages, and promises that her hotel family would always be waiting whenever she chose to return. Ryan attended every pediatric appointment, every family meeting, and every ordinary afternoon he possibly could. He never arrived with expensive gifts or dramatic speeches. Sometimes he simply held Grace while Emily rested. Other days he quietly folded baby clothes, assembled furniture, or read children's books aloud even though Grace was still too young to understand the stories. Emily noticed the consistency more than anything else. He never disappeared after the emotional moments ended. He remained present during the ordinary ones. Walker Technologies continued growing steadily, but visitors entering Ryan's office immediately noticed the biggest change. The wall once covered with awards and magazine covers now displayed family photographs instead. One picture showed Grace sleeping peacefully in Ryan's arms. Another captured Emily smiling while hotel employees surrounded the baby with joyful laughter. The plaque celebrating the company's greatest financial recovery never returned to the hallway. In its place stood a simple framed sentence that every employee passed each morning. "Character builds what success can never buy." Months later, on a bright spring afternoon, Emily returned to the Grand Regent Hotel for the first time since Grace's birth. She was not returning because she needed a job. She came because she wanted to thank the people who had quietly carried her through one of the most difficult and meaningful seasons of her life. As she entered the lobby carrying Grace, applause unexpectedly filled the room. Housekeepers, receptionists, cooks, maintenance workers, managers, and bellhops gathered together smiling warmly. Linda stepped forward first and embraced Emily carefully. "Welcome home," she said. Emily looked around with grateful tears. "Thank you for believing in me when I needed it most." Ryan stood several feet away holding the stroller, allowing Emily to enjoy the moment that truly belonged to her. He understood now that the hotel had never been a symbol of hardship. It had become the place where dignity, gratitude, and quiet kindness rebuilt a life one ordinary day at a time. Before leaving, Emily placed a framed photograph inside the employee lounge. It showed the entire hotel staff gathered around Grace during her first visit. Beneath the picture she had written only one sentence. "Thank you for reminding me that family is sometimes found where kindness lives." As Ryan looked at the photograph, he realized the greatest lesson of his life had never come from boardrooms, billion-dollar negotiations, or business victories. It came from watching one woman prove that honest work carried out with compassion could change more lives than wealth ever could. Together Ryan and Emily walked toward the hotel entrance, Grace sleeping peacefully between them in her stroller. They did not walk as people trying to erase yesterday. They walked as two parents who had chosen to honor tomorrow with patience, humility, and respect. Outside, the spring sunlight reflected across the city streets while guests entered and left the hotel without realizing they had just passed a family whose greatest victory could never be measured on a balance sheet. Some people spend their lives searching for success, only to discover too late that true wealth was never found in what they owned. It was always waiting inside the quiet choices they made for someone else when nobody was watching.